I'm anticipating that we're going to have others come on in. So my name is Lynn Lucas, and I work with the early education team at Children at Risk. I am here with Kim Coffrin, who is the Executive Director of Early Childhood Education at Children at Risk. And we are so glad to have you join us this morning for the April 2026 Texas tour. We're always excited about getting to have some new information, like, in our presentations for you, and that is also true today. So we look forward to being able to share that with you. Our time together today is sectioned out into three parts. The first being quality. I'll escort you through that section. The second section will be access to quality childcare through childcare deserts, through an analysis of that. Kim will escort you through that portion. And then Kim will also escort you through the policy portion of our work together. We always encourage your participation, and we're off to a strong start. You are welcome to come offline and speak as if we're in the room, the actual room together. You're also welcome to put things in the chat, whether it's a comment or a question. And do be prepared, because at the end of each section, we will bring up a Zoom poll, and we ask for your participation in those as well. We look forward to our time together with you, and want to remind you that Children at Risk serves as a catalyst for change to improve the quality of life for children in several different ways. Those ways include strategic research, public policy analysis, education, collaboration, and advocacy. And we appreciate all the work that you do in those areas as well. Here's the rest of our early childhood team that do work both in front of and behind the scenes. And we could not do this work without them or without you. If you're not already engaged with the Prenatal to 3 Collaborative, we encourage you to grab this QR code and come on over and join us for those quarterly meetings and those bi-monthly newsletters that are a little bit different from the other work that we do. This work is in collaboration with some other statewide partners, and so we'd love to see you there. Speaking of QR codes and slides, you will receive a copy of the slide deck in an email after this, along with everything else that we reference. So if you're wanting to make sure that you have some of this information, not to worry, it will be coming to you. Let's dig into quality, shall we? So what we're looking at here are the quality dollar investments that Gulf Coast made in the board calendar year 2023, right alongside the board calendar year 2024. Reminder, the board calendar year 2024 ended in September of 2025. So what we see here are the targeted ways that your local workforce board chose to invest those quality dollars. Now, TRS was in no way new in 2023. There was a lot of gearing up of programs in 2023. In 2024, that's when it became mandatory that all subsidy providers engage with Texas Rising Star. So it is interesting to see some of the shifts that were made between those years. We can see the red column represents 2023. And looking at Gulf Coast, we can see, wow, 79% of the quality funds were all invested in Texas Rising Star supports. What are Texas Rising Star supports, you ask? We are going to talk about all of those categories in just a moment. These are the broader categories. So we can see that in 2023, a whole lot was invested in that area, and there was still a lot invested. 28% of funds is a lot, but a lot less than the year before. Where did those investments shift to in 2024? Well, we see that in the gray columns, and clearly that is in the other category. What in the world is in the other category? That 68% is a whole lot. We're going to talk about that in just a moment as well. And do note before we get there that Gulf Coast is not alone. Almost all local workforce boards spent a majority of their dollars in that other category. And so really curious to find out what that is and why that might have been. We can also see that there were other places that where investments were made. Do also note that if the investment dollars don't equal at least 1% of the overall quality dollars that your local workforce board had, it won't show up on this graph. So let's look now at the difference between 2024 board calendar year statewide, right alongside Gulf Coast Local Workforce Board expenditures. And it is interesting to look at the difference, averaged out along the state. You can see there with that other category, your 68% is a whole lot. 35% statewide is a lot too. It wasn't near that in previous years. So that was huge. We also see that statewide, a little bit more was spent, quite a bit more was spent under Texas Rising Star supports, professional development, and also infant toddler. And that's just because there was such a targeted investment in Gulf Coast area in that other category. We can see this represents all of the 28 workforce boards, and Gulf Coast is in red. We can see here the icons represent what category we're invested in. This one doesn't show you how much. It just shows you that when that workforce board was filling out their reports, they specifically coded and said, we've invested these dollars, it was TRS supports. These dollars, it was professional development. And so this just lets you know that some amount was spent in these areas. And you can see Gulf Coast has TRS supports, professional development, infant toddlers, evaluation assessment, other, and then also national accreditation. Other workforce boards, some of them invested in a more diverse array of categories and others less. It's interesting to look alongside those. Now let's look at some of those more detailed subcategories. So this one, when we think about TRS supports as a whole category, we can see right underneath that the subcategory components. Those include materials, equipment, resources, curriculum, outdoor learning, which is most often some kind of outdoor curriculum, additional TRS mentor salaries, family engagement, and TechPEDS SME, which stands for Texas Early Childhood Professional Development System, subject matter expert. Yes, it's a mouthful, of course, but because programs were mandated to become a part of Texas Rising Star, and Texas Rising Star requires engagement with the TechPED system, there were additional supports offered to make sure that the administrative support was there to help programs be able to engage with that, to capture training hours and career pathway and other things like that. So that's what that one is about. If you look across the board, you can see in what ways all the other workforce boards invested in these TRS supports. Gulf Coast having equipment and some additional funds for TRS mentor salaries, mentor salaries, and TechPEDS SME. Infants and toddlers, it's so important to invest specifically in that area, and so thus it's a targeted option. For the Gulf Coast, you invested in professional development that was specifically with infant and toddler work in mind, and then also an evaluation and assessment that was specifically geared toward infant toddler related work. So that's certainly important to think, okay, those are some specific areas that your local workforce board elected to invest in. There is other professional development that could include an array of things, as you know. These include training, conferences, CDA support, TRS orientation, college scholarships, and apprenticeships, so many ways. And so for each community, trying to figure out what avenue is going to best respond to needs in your area is really important. Gulf Coast felt like trainings and conferences, CDA support, and college scholarships were the key ways to be able to reach some of those goals. Some things for you to think about when you look at these is just, okay, if we invested funds in this area, did I notice that in the work that I do, whether it's a program or a community or a collaboration? In what ways have you seen some of these supports show up in your space? Gulf Coast Local Workforce Board is humongous, as I'm sure you are all aware. And there are, many places that sometimes work comes together to be able to support the overall quality. And so do they work alongside well with one another? Now let's look at this other category, this 60 whatever percent, 69% that it was huge. And we can see that the the spending allocated, the subcategories could include wage supplements, pre-K partnerships, and childcare management systems. And we can see that all of Gulf Coast invested in wage supplements. Wage supplements were things like responding to quality indicators reaching Texas Rising Star levels, incentives, or just an acknowledgement of having reached that level, and individual teachers and directors were recognized by receiving some additional funds. Sometimes this really kind of helped underscore the importance of retention, and also just to respect the fact that teachers need to be paid more and they're not. And so if we're going to recognize the extra efforts that go into having a quality program, this was one way to do that. And clearly local workforce board in Gulf Coast felt like that was a priority. So that's another place to ask yourself, in what ways did that show up for you? You can also see with the other local workforce boards, most did invest in some way in the wage supplement category. That was a key thing that we saw was a very big difference from the year before. And then we can also see where the other investments came up. Let's talk about quality and how quality shows up in regards to Texas Rising Star levels. What we see here is the difference between Texas Rising Star levels between 2023 and 2024. The gray columns represent 2023, the red 2024, and this is all Gulf Coast. Texas Rising Star 2 is at the bottom. Huge increase in the number of programs that came on board to Texas Rising Star 2. We also see that there's a really big increase in Texas Rising Star 3, and also an increase in Texas Rising Star 4. So across the board, you saw more programs come on at each level. You saw a bunch come on to Texas Rising Star 2 and 3. As you know, every time a program is evaluated, they can go either up or down or lose their star level. And also, when people come on board from the very beginning, they may get evaluated and come in at this star 2 level, but you also can come in and just be super rock star and come in at that Texas Rising Star 4 level right away. The question you want to ask yourself now is, what are the quality goals for the years forward? Is it to maintain those levels? Is it to increase those levels? Is a little bit of both? Are there other quality indicators that you're introducing right alongside Texas Rising Star? Paving the Way to Quality is a report that we released not long ago, and it dives into a more detailed analysis of these results. Specifically, you can see an executive summary that looks at statewide analysis. Then you can also see more detailed information. That's a pullout report specific to your workforce board area. And if you are curious and you want to see how another workforce board is doing, and sometimes there are either similarities or maybe some are very different and you're curious, those are available for you too. And so can grab that at this QR code, and reminder that will be available for you at the at a follow-up email. And now I'm going to pull up a poll here and pause. You're welcome to any comments or questions are welcome right now, as I pull up this poll, and just ask you to please engage with that. After a few minutes, I'll share the results out with everyone and we can consider that.
And Tim, to your question about the pre-K partnership facilitators, this is looking at the Gulf Coast quality dollars, so not counting what the state's facilitators are. So the state has their pre-K partnership group, and that's the state's quality dollars. This is just looking at Gulf Coast quality dollars. Good question. Yes, Renee. The infant toddler special network, sometimes it just depends on how the boards classify the dollars and how they're being spent. So doesn't mean it's not happening, it just means how they potentially are, what bucket they put it in. So
yeah,
we haven't completely figured out the science behind how the boards classify things. So good question though.
Kim, what were your thoughts on the quality differences between years, just some of those outcomes and analysis?
Yeah, the exciting thing about this year's report was really because we have the previous year's report, which was kind of our baseline. We had never looked at how boards were using quality dollars. It's like looking to see, one of the questions going into this year was like, would they adjust? Would they change? And they did. And so that was kind of exciting to see if how boards are adjusting to compare, hopefully they're responding to what the providers and the community needs. And I think the other big exciting thing for my big takeaway was the amount of money in the other category that are specifically for wage supplements. We know it's not nearly enough to solve the compensation problem, but the fact that, in 23, the ARPA dollars were ending and those wage supplement programs at the state level were ending. And so in 24, workforce boards took up a bit of that on their own. Again, not enough money to really make the big differences that we want, but just the recognition of that. So I think that was the other big thing for me.
Very good. Well, let's see what some of the feedback is that we have for the biggest barriers to quality in your community. We got a few of you to respond here and just consider, do you agree or disagree? What are your thoughts about these? We look at the blue lines together to kind of consider this really quickly. Salary and benefit levels, yes, 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 yes. And you know you're not alone in that area. And clearly the whole Gulf Coast community agrees with you in that 69% of wage supplement expenditures. Next, okay, Gulf Coast, you have three that are really close to each other, which I also think is interesting because I don't know if we've had like a three-level tie yet. Maybe it's not totally a tie, but pretty close there. So C, D, and E, licensing related issues, turnover of representatives, access to information, overburdens with administrative paperwork. There's definitely some crossover between those two. The quality level of applicants, all of those come really close as the second level barrier, with the last one being quality or access to professional development. So any thoughts, comments, questions about any of that, any of those pieces? Okay, then I am going to hand it over to Kim to talk about access to quality childcare.
Sounds great. Thank you, Lynn. Um, Good to see everybody and be with you all today. So we are going to jump into the access piece. You all are hopefully aware that we have been tracking deserts here at Children at Risk since 2017, almost 10 years. Next year, we can say it'll be our 10-year anniversary of collecting the data, which is really quite fascinating. And so during the last 9 years, we have been really looking at those first three sections. So when we look at deserts, this is our way of kind of giving a temperature check of how is the supply and demand going in Texas. And so we looked at overall childcare deserts. And a desert is a zip code where at least 30 children ages 0 to 5, and where the demand for childcare is 3 times greater than the supply. So there's 3 times more children than the supply. That's all children, all childcare under the age of 6. Subsidy is our next level of deserts, and this is really looking at our low income families, and same parameters, but just low income families. And we use the 200%, below 200% of the FPL, the federal poverty level, as our parameters for our low income kiddos. Then we look at our Texas Rising Star deserts, which looks at those same parameters, but where the quality sits. Texas Rising Star is our measurement of quality in Texas. And so that is our parameter there. So historically, over the last 8 years, we have looked at those three things across the board. What we've added this year is letting people in from the waiting room. What we added this year was looking at chronic childcare deserts. And this is looking at those same zip codes, same parameters, 0 to 5, same level of care, same demand, 3 times greater, but where those deserts have been for more than three or more years. And so where have they been chronically? And if you think about a child's life from 0 to 5, 3 years is half of that child's life in that time frame. So knowing that that is problematic for their own development, but also for the family's ability to enter the workforce and thrive on their end. So when we look at deserts this year, what we and what the next 3 slides, well, 4 slides, 3 slides, we'll have on the right side, or excuse me, on the left side will be in the gray and the black is the overall Texas numbers, and then in the red is Gulf Coast. I will show you the interactive map here in a second, and you can drill down to your county. So if you're looking at Harris County or Fort Bend County, you can look at more specifics around there with the map. But for our purposes today, we're looking at the Gulf Coast region. So across the board, we had about 995,000 seats across Texas. If you remember last year's data, we lost about 75,000 seats. This year, we actually gained about 3,000 seats across the state, which was good news. And really, 3,000 in that scheme of things is really we held consistent, and we dropped from 420 deserts to 413. In the Gulf Coast region, we are at just over 340,000, 304,000. Make sure I get my numbers right. Seats across Gulf Coast. That's up just about 500 seats from last year. So really, again, keeping even. And then our deserts are at 43 deserts. When we look at our subsidy list and numbers, these numbers are obviously much smaller. We have about 148, almost 149,000 across the state. But you see that deserts jumped to 884. So we were at 413 overall, but when we filter in for low income families, that number doubles across the state. So we have 884 deserts across the state. In the Gulf Coast region, you are sitting at 35,000, almost 36,000 seats, and 169 deserts. And one of the things that we saw with the deserts this year and the growth and the numbers, okay, we're increasing seats, but deserts are going up as well. What we kind of drilled into that and figured out, okay, what's going on? And so one of the things we kind of found was either a zip code that didn't have 30 children in it last year now does, and their supply was minimal to begin with, and so we just added a desert because that zip code now has more than 30 children. We saw growth outpace capacity growth. So we saw that we increased seats, but we also increased demand, and they weren't even. And then we also saw zip codes and communities that just lost childcare, that lost centers closed, and we just lost capacity that way. So it's a matter of where the growth was. We saw growth, but they weren't in deserts, and that's another thing that we have to factor into is we can see growth happening, but if they're not happening in the communities that really need it, that increases our supply, but doesn't necessarily affect our deserts or sometimes makes our deserts worse. When we look at our Texas Rising Star numbers, there it flips for me. These numbers are getting close to what our subsidy numbers are, which makes sense. So we have about 132,000 seats across the state, 938 deserts. And in the Gulf Coast region, we have about 31,000 seats and 892 deserts. Again, where we saw an increase in Texas Rising Star as we all lived into mandatory Texas Rising Star. So we expected those numbers to increase. But also when those numbers are going in the same direction, that again makes us question why is that? And that again is those new seats are they happening in those current deserts, or are they happening in areas that are a supply? We know we are losing childcare? Are those decreases in seats happening in which communities? So again, just being able to really drill down and kind of find out what's happening in those communities. The next one is our chronic. And so when we look at the Gulf Coast region, we see that you guys are sitting right about 60% of all of your deserts are what we considered chronic. So that on the first column on the left is overall. So this is again looking at all overall childcare. 60%, so 26 out of the 43 deserts are considered chronic or have been a desert for 3 years or more. The subsidy, you're sitting at 102 out of the 169, like right at 60%. And then Texas Rising Star, a little higher. You're sitting at 126 out of the 182 deserts, and again at 69% there. So we can see that when you think about those communities, and this is very interesting data to me, who works on statewide systems and statewide policy. But what I get excited about is really thinking about how communities can really drill down into what is happening in those communities. You might look at a zip code and go, "Oh, yeah, that's why," and understand the dynamics there more than I would. And so we really hope that this is a tool that you all use to really understand what's happening in your communities and kind of give you another piece of information to know the longevity of those communities. So
Kim,
what is this? Yeah.
before you move on, we have a question about the license capacity numbers, and are these based
Mhm.
off of license capacity? Would you address that, please?
Yeah, sure. Yes, they are addressed to license capacity. So they are what we would call conservative deserts. So we know that if you are licensed for 100 children but only have staff to care for 75 children, or only run your program at 75 children because you have the ratios you keep, et cetera. We know that those are less than that. So our deserts and our availability are probably more challenging than what this was, but we don't have that data. So this is just looking at license capacity. Good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. So this is our look longitudinally across the last 5 years. So obviously in 22, or excuse me, 21, we were still in the pandemic. You can see that big dip that we were coming from. And then we bounced right back up in 22 when we had all the ARPA dollars. And so that top line is the overall childcare availability of seats. So as of the 2025 data, we have about 86 seats per 100 children of working families overall. That's everybody, all childcare across the state. So that's pretty good. We don't need it to be 100 to 100 because not all families need formalized care. So 86 is pretty good, right? If we were that way, didn't have deserts, and that was equitable across the state, I would be a happy camper. But that's not the case. And then if we look at that low income middle line, which is looking at our subsidy childcare, we only have about 26 seats per 100 children. So working children are working children of working families. So we know that that's a much bigger gap to follow, to fill. And then that bottom line is specifically looking at Texas Rising Star, and that's at 23 seats per 100. So you can see that 26 and 23 are getting closer to each other, which is what we anticipated would happen as we lived into mandatory Texas Rising Star, that those programs are those numbers are going to get close. We never expect them to be completely one for one because there will always be new programs coming in to the Texas Rising Star program, but we are anticipating those getting closer and closer as we continue to live into it. This next piece of data is one of my favorite slides out of the whole thing, because it's looking at the actual number of providers and the actual number of children. So on the left is the number of providers that accept subsidy that are in the system that are now on Texas Rising Star, and you can see that you are right at, I think that the state number is actually the 71.9, and so those numbers should be flipped on in order. So and the state, and then, excuse me, Gulf Coast is at 75.5%. And then across the state, and then the number of children, which is the one that gets me most excited. Oh, and one before I leave the providers. Also important to remember that when we look at that 70% number, and in some regions that's closer to 80 or even 90%. When we started, before we put mandatory Texas Rising Star into place, that number was hovering around 30%. 30% of programs that accept subsidy were in the Texas Rising Star program. And so this program really, this really made that vast improvement, and that seems so. Kudos to all of you who work in that space daily and make those improvements to childcare and get them in that system. Number of children, that is also exciting to see, that we have 80% of all of our children that accept scholarships, that have scholarships, are in a Texas Rising Star program. Again, that is fantastic to know that those children that are in those programs are getting high quality programs across the board. We also have been tracking family childcare. This is an area that we know needs more attention. We know that they did not bounce back after the pandemic like centers did. So we are still seeing a 22% decrease of family childcare providers since before the pandemic. We did see a slight bump this year, which is exciting. But it's, but we will continue to hold them close and have them as a focus, as we know that family childcare is vital for a choice for parents. We know it's a choice that parents like to make for their infants and toddlers since they're smaller group environments. We also know they are popular with families that need non-traditional care early in the morning, late at night, or evenings and weekends. And so those are it's a vital piece of our ecosystem that we want to make sure that we are rising up and paying attention to. And then our last slide before we go to the map is this is just a slide that looks at our number of children under the age of 6, and 1 in 4 low-income children has a scholarship. There's funding there for a scholarship. So we're rating right at 26% of our population that can receive that scholarship, so that we know that's not nearly enough to be able to receive those scholarships, that we need more money in the system to be able to serve more children, because 25% isn't enough for those families to make sure that they all have enough childcare. So with that, Lynn, if you will stop sharing your slides, and I'm going to share my slide, share the map. We've added a couple features this year to our map. So this is on our website. And if you click here and click view map, look at it just pulling up. Usually it waits a couple seconds. So you guys are fortunate. So this is the interactive map that you will find. So we added this new red box here on the right, this 263. This is the number of chronic childcare deserts across the state. Then you can look down at the map and you can see, oh, I'm zoomed in a little bit too much. You can see that the deserts that are outlined in that dark outline, that's the visual indication that is a chronic desert. And then you can see the different variations there. You can also up here toggle on this teal line, and the chronic designation goes away. So if you don't want to look at that, you can click out of it. You can also view the childcare providers here. So this is pulling up the Texas Rising Star 4 programs across the state, and you can filter in and look at those. You can filter for programs that accept child and adult food program. You can look at NAEYC accreditation, Head Start, etc. So you can filter those in. The other thing, you can also filter by your workforce board, county, school district, city council, zip code, House and Senate districts, commissioners courts in Houston. So I'm going to do workforce board, and I'm going to do Gulf Coast. So then you can see the region there. And then these numbers up top will then filter to your region. So you can click on total, you can click on subsidy and see those tracks, and then you can look at Texas Rising Star and see where those are at and drill down into that. You can also up here, go back to total. You can also click on the overtime, which gives you your own longitudinal look from all the way since 2017, and how and so you can kind of see Gulf Coast. We're kind of right where we were before the pandemic. You can kind of see that piece. And then there's also a downloadable data system that you can download the entire data system and then filter based on what you need and what you're specifically looking at. So you can do multiple. So if you wanted to do, I'm going to go to county and do Harris and Fort Bend. Oh, let me go back to, sorry, let me go back to the map. Then you can see those two counties together. Um, so you can add and play as much as you want and filter in the with those different data sets. All right, I'm going to stop there, check on any questions in the chat and then you have a poll to release. So this is really looking at the barriers to childcare, and again, just ranking them um, on based on what you well, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing. All right, and while you guys are doing that, Preeti, do the deserts take into account family and homes? So family childcare, yes, those are factored into our deserts. We look at licensed and registered. We don't factor in listed for subsidy because they're not eligible to be to receive subsidy. But good question on that. Um, Tim, is there any information on talking about middle income families who have pulled out of childcare programs because they can't afford tuition, especially if they have two children? Not that I have seen specifically. I think there is some work happening on looking at families, just who's entering the workforce and who's looking for a job. But I don't know if they have factored in if there's someone that's layering in number of children. There's been some surveys to parents through Capita and some other national organizations that looked at choices, and childcare is one of the reasons they have listed that they have left the workforce, but I don't know if there's any like overlay on like numbers. Good question. And then Nicole, how often is this data updated? We update it every spring, and so this is the data that you are looking at on the maps is as of September of 2025, and so we update. That's the when the board calendar year ends. And so that's where we pull that data from. So this is as of September 2025. Good questions, everybody. All right. And you are sharing the results. So cost of families, yeah, that's one of the biggest barriers, right? For middle income or low income families, it is expensive. And that is related to number two, cost of doing business. If we could make all those businesses, if we could make it cheaper to run, we could pass those costs on to families, but it's an expensive proposition. Not enough staff. We hear that continually. And you guys are in the trend. Location is going the least of it's the ranks number 4 in all of our deserts so far, or all of our polling so far. So you guys are tracking right along in that piece. Any other questions about the data? Good questions, everybody. All right, Lynn, let's share the last slide and get into the advocacy piece. Okay. So just again to kind of level set us of where we are in the ecosystem.
Hey,
So
how are
got,
you? Good. I just
thank you. I was looking for the mute button. 47% of all the zip codes in Texas qualify as a childcare desert for our low income families. So we know that's too much, too many. We know at the cost of families, this is what we just said in your little very scientific, highly researchable Zoom poll, that the cost of families is prohibitive to childcare. And then we also know our early childhood educating workforce is 6 times more likely to live in poverty than our elementary and middle school teachers, and 43% of our early childhood educator households participate in one or more public assistance themselves. And so we know that's kind of where the ecosystem is. You guys have seen my tricycle before, but I continue to use it because it's a good way to help talk about our complicated system. But that first wheel, the first back wheel is that brick and mortar, and that's what our deserts look at, and look at really just what is our license capacity and where are the children, and how many children are there of working parents, and what is that ratio. But like we said, if we can have beautiful buildings, and great capacity, but if we don't have the educators to go in them, then we have empty buildings. And so we can't forget about that front tire, and how do we support the pipeline? How do we support compensation? How do we support their professional growth, making sure they are armed with the tools and resources and the education they need to be successful in the classrooms, and all of those things. And those two things factor into affordability. And if it's unaffordable for families, we can have beautiful buildings and great teachers, and teachers that are paid well and paid what they need to be paid. But if it's not affordable to parents, then those classrooms stay empty. And so how do we make sure that those three things are in balance with each other, and that when we think about systems change and systems growth, we do that in tandem with each other, and making sure that those are all at the forefront of our mind. That framework is our rules and regulations, how those systems work together or don't. If our frame is strong and aligned, our tricycle will move forward. If it's not, we have a problem, right? And then the pedals are the funding. We can't move forward without funding. We know this. Our system is underfunded for decades. I almost said centuries, but that's probably true too. We know it's been underfunded, and not serving the number of children that we want. And we know the business model, the math doesn't math, as many of us have said. So how do we continue to work on that funding piece? And then each of us is in the driver's seat to continue to work, and improve the system. So what is that system? What does our tricycle look like in Texas? We right now are across 6 different state agencies. We have obviously Health and Human Services, which is where our child care regulations sits. It also is where our early childhood intervention program sits, along with other family support services and 211 and Texas Thriving Families, et cetera. We also have Department of Family Protective Services, which is where our child abuse and neglect statewide intake is housed, along with foster care and kinship care. We have Department of State Health Services. Obviously, those have maternal and child health and Help Me Grow, but also our immunization trackers, making sure that all the children in your care have the vaccines that they need to keep them safe and their friends safe. And then we have the Texas Workforce Commission. So you, as a child care provider, you're in those first 3 automatically. Then you choose to take subsidy, and you now are working with the Texas Workforce Commission, which obviously holds our child care services, our subsidy, and our Texas Rising Star program. And then we have the Department of Ag, which houses our child adult food program. And then if you take pre-K partnerships or work with your ISD or have a kiddo with special needs, you're working with your independent school district, and different rules and regs from Texas Education Agency. So that is a lot to manage. That frame of that tricycle has a lot of things pulling on it and adjusting from it. And so in that, we've had last legislative session, 2 bills were passed. House Bill 117 and House Bill 4903. House Bill 117 established the governor's task force on the governance of early childhood education and care. This is really looking at how do we govern in a better way to serve more children and families, to do it more efficiently, to hopefully make our dollars go farther, in a way that really helps providers so they're not being pulled and from multiple different directions on different things. House Bill 4903 established a quad agency child care initiative that was focused on those rules and regulations specifically. Where is there duplication? Where are there things contradicting each other? Where are things, is it a training issue? They just don't understand what each other says and how it builds on each other. All those things around rules and regs are built under that quad agency. And then the third thing that happened, didn't really happen last legislative session, it's an ongoing thing, is the Sunset Review Commission. This is a standalone state agency that the Sunset Review Commission rotates through all the different state agencies on every 10 to 12 year basis. This year, Department of State Health Services, Health and Human Services, Department of State Health Services, and Texas Workforce Commission all are under sunset review. So these three things are happening all at the same time. So we've got the Governor's Task Force, the Quad Agency Regulation Review, as well as the Sunset Commission, all happening. That can, and I jokingly say, we either the stars have aligned or we have made the gods mad, and I'm not sure which one is true. But we have a really unique opportunity over the next 6 to 8 months, and then as we go into legislative session to really rethink how we govern and structure our early childhood space across all the different state agencies. This slide briefly just goes over what those state agencies, which ones are affected by which action over the next few months. So in preparation to that and knowing this was all coming, we did a survey last fall. And thank you for those of you who filled it out. We had over 1,300 childcare providers and parents fill it out across all 28 workforce boards. So we are excited about the voices that we were able to raise up from that. Our Texas tour last year, we also did some town hall questions and really did some listening to what was happening in communities, and then was able to bubble those things up. Those things became, that's just our community voice respondents, but those things really became our recommendations, our big idea recommendations. We all know the devil's in the details of what those recommendations look like. But, we heard from providers about rules constantly changing. And if you're a child care center, you have to play by these rules, but if you're in public school, you have to play by these rules. And how do we, and if you're TRS wants, one example was TRS wants real life materials in the classroom, and some licensing reps think those are dangerous. And so they're so mentor says put those in, rep says take them out. Who do we listen to? Like all those contradiction of things that was happening across different providers, and really hearing from their voices were raised up in that process. And so what providers were really asking for was a more coordinated regulatory structure, as well as agency and cross-agency training on standards, which could really improve that conflicting guidance, and overall universal statewide rules for the same age children, with clear protocols and accountability. So we needed an entity, a person, an agency that is with decision-making authority over all of our programs to really that impact child care and developmental services. How do we really build that a cohesive system? The second thing is around efficiency, improving efficiency and reviewing local workforce boards of service areas, to better align resources with today's population and community needs. Our workforce boards were developed 30 years ago. Texas has changed in 30 years. So what's working, what doesn't need to work, and really how do we realign that piece of it? The next recommendation was really around application and access streamlining. Again, thinking about not only the providers, but families. How do we streamline and modernize this, all the different services that are available for children and families, and giving them a common application that they don't have to fill multiple forms out, streamlining eligibility information. Some things are as of April 1st, and some things are your income as of September 1st. Some will use the federal poverty line, some use the state median income. So how can we streamline that so it's easier for families and children to get the services that they qualify for and need, as well as providers, so you can understand and have a better clear picture of how that all works together. So how can we create that single integrated system for families, and really think through those pieces? The next one is around regulatory and implementation alignment. Again, this is kind of really thinking about between Health and Human Services and Texas Workforce Commission, the excess paperwork, the duplicative documents. I was talking to a provider a couple weeks ago, and she was filling out her fourth compliance on technology fraud and cybersecurity for the different agencies. That she's like, why can't I just fill this out for one state agency and like be shared? It's the same 4 computers. So how can we streamline that type of stuff? Different inspectors tell us different things. You have a new licensing rep, and what worked for one isn't working for the other. So how can we streamline those pieces? Again, the differences between licensing and Texas Workforce Commission, and how are those better aligned, is something we continue to hear. And the overall inspectors, uh, providers really told us that they want more supportive and less punitive relationships with child care regulations, and how do we build that up? So how do we build that consistent, uniform training, robust state system across the different regulatory entities, oversight practice that can modernize and is grounded in support. And then also background checks came up with this one, is how can we streamline background checks across providers that have multiple locations, and those different things that's within our control. The last two are around contracting accountability and performance management. And the last one is access for children with disabilities. That first one is really thinking about, it was no surprise that we heard loud and strong about the issues around the Texas 3C rollout, our new child management system with the payment issues and the all the issues that came with that last year. And so how do we hold not only the providers accountable, which they felt like they were being accountable, but how do we hold the workforce boards, the contractors, the state accountable for those systems as well? That this is we're all players in that, and how do we build a better coordinated system across that as well? And the last one is really around access to children with disabilities and improving access. We know that there is a differential rate for children with special needs, but we know that that's hard to get and cumbersome. We know there's issues with getting children identified, either the wait list with ECI or with the public school, depending on the child's age. We know there's issues when that child transitions from a great ECI program into the public school, and all of those things that factor into the children with disabilities. And in fact, there was House Bill 2310 was passed last session that really that asked TEA and Health and Human Services and Texas Workforce Commission to develop a strategic plan. They have a new survey that's out specifically around children with disabilities. It is only open until Sunday, so please take a moment and fill that out. I think Lynn's going to drop that in the chat if she hasn't done so already. But if and please share that with your networks if they have information, if you know people that are dealing with that, to really understand what is happening with children with disabilities. As the state develops a strategic plan, they need to hear from providers and families that have experienced it, and where they can make improvements. So with that, I'll look at the chat and see if there's any questions. And really the question, the poll that Lynn's going to post here in a second is really around, what are your thoughts about those recommendations? What excites you? What gives you concern? Where are your questions? And feel free to put them in the poll, or also drop them in the chat, or just come off mute and tell us.
I'm gonna unmute. I'm gonna unmute.
Go ahead, Preeti.
My biggest concern on recommendations, because this is when we start having central organizations, you've also got all the issues with that, like who is there, who's going on there. Like I know about that governance board, but frankly, I don't even know who got chosen to be on that. And were they people who were active in our early care community? So that's kind of like, I guess it's a shout out to all of us that we need to get more involved. And if it does end up coming out, we need to get the right people in there.
Yeah, you are right, Preeti. And I can drop the there's a new website for the Governor's Task Force. Let me see if I can find it quickly. There it is. Here's the and we will make sure to include it. I know, Preeti, you're driving. We'll make sure to include it in the follow-up email as well, so that way you can have that. And there's also one on the Quad Agency, the one that's looking at regulations. They have a new website as well. so you can follow along for that piece. And the governor's task force has had one meeting thus far, and which was the end of March, because we're already at the end of April. That's hard to believe. And it's an 11-member task force. Peter Holt is the chair, and there is probably 4 or 5 people out of the 11 that are providers, Head Start teachers, are on the Texas Early Learning Council, higher ed, a mix of that. But the rest of them are majority of them are new to the early childhood game, or have been involved in some form but not in the details. So it was a lot of that first meeting was a lot of questions and level setting and understanding the system. So I think you're right, making sure that our voices are being heard at those when they have meetings, and we will do our best to keep those updated. Y'all updated when those meetings are happening and when they're public, and how to be involved. But yeah, it's like I said, either the stars have aligned or we've made the gods mad, and depending on how this turns out, depends on what really before we make that judgment call. So yeah, Tim.
Yeah, so with regards to the governor's task force, we are having before and after meetings with 2 of the child care providers that are on the task force. So if any of you guys would like to join those calls, I will put my email address in the chat. But Kim was right. The rest of the people that are on the board don't really have a clue about childcare and early ed and so forth. So those 2 people are going to have to do a lot of educating of the other members of the task force. So we're providing them with questions to ask, and then as things are coming up in the meeting after the follow-up, to find out kind of what the reactions were to that. There is a third childcare provider on there that's tied to one of the universities, but so far we've not been able to have any direct communications with that person. So still working on that. But again, if you want to join those calls, send me an email and I'll get you connected with that.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. And I think so with the governor's task force, with the quad agency, and with the Sunset Review, all of those are going to have a report out. Sunset Review Commission will have a report out on TWC, I think, in the next couple months. Health and Human Services will be a little bit later this fall. All of them will have reports out by December, because they will all potentially turn into possible legislation next year. And so we have a time now to influence those reports. But then when we get into legislative session in January, we will also have opportunities to be involved in that process as well. So this is definitely a long haul, a short long haul. So it's going to be fast over almost a year from now. We will be towards the end of legislative session, which is kind of scary. But we'll have a lot happening in the next few months. So thank you for that, Tim. Centrise.
Good morning, everyone. Tim, those providers that you are working with, are either of them a home-based provider by chance?
No, there are no home-based providers. It's university-based program, and then the other 2 providers are center-based providers. One in Killeen, and I can't remember the other location. So
I think Dallas-Fort Worth area, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so I see some of our home-based providers on the call today. That might be a good follow-up for you all as well, to have your voice continue to be raised.
Yeah, Desi, I think as we have the committee set, because it was the governor appointed, and those 11 are set, but there will be opportunities for public comment and public hearings. So I think that's where we can definitely make sure you're part of that piece. And you're right, there is no one from the Houston region on the governor's task force. So making sure the Houston voice is being heard is it's definitely important. You guys are a big region of our state. You guys, Gulf Coast has 25% of the funds and the kids. So we definitely want to make sure that those voices are being heard. Yep. Great, Desi. All right, Lynn, anything from the poll that came in that we need to lift up?
We have, let's see, Kim, somebody wants to know at this point in the tour, what are the top priorities we're seeing across the state that we're prioritizing for the next legislative session?
I think we're, at this point we are doing a lot of conversations with the governor's task force, with Sunset Commission, and with the Quad Agency, and really learning what's going to stick. We have recommendations, that we have those 6 recommendations. There's a lot of details within those. But when we talk to legislators and decision makers, where are they like on board? Where's their heartburn? Where there's a no-go? What do we need to do more education on, and explaining and understanding, messaging? So I think that's where we are right now, is really kind of learning how the wind is blowing, and then so we can then adjust how the wind's blowing, and know where the conversations need to be had. So I think that's where our real focus is right now, is really understanding, taking these ideas and then having more conversations with those decision makers, and figuring out, like, oh, they really don't understand this part of it. And so we need to do more education. And I might not be the best person. I may need to call Desi, and she may need to come in and I'd be the best person to deliver that, and really understand who can share that message the best.
Mhm. We also have a couple of people who are like, yes, on the common applications and that idea. Kintasha specifically says that they've heard feedback that a common application for pre-K 3 and 4 would also be helpful. A comment about the Kinder Connect, that's still kind of in the process. It's still, some people are having a difficult time with that.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions. Carol, your question about the timeline on when the fundings would be shared with the public, was that for the Sunset Report? Or was that about?
Yes, she said yes in chat.
Okay. That's all I have.
Awesome. All right, Lynn, we have a couple more slides to share. And Santrice, you have a resource that you wanted to provide?
Yes. Do you want me to go now?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Good morning again, everyone. As we're preparing to close out, I just wanted to highlight and remind everyone that if you are within Harris County, your Prop 2 childcare tax exemption applications are due tomorrow. So I am going to drop into the chat just a brief, well, it's not brief, a long a long message that's going to have some additional links that you all can follow. There is a webinar that we've created to help support you all, and then the link to both the application and affidavit if needed. So just let us know how we can support you all. And then the Harris Central Appraisal District is also ready and waiting on you all if you need support as well. Thanks, Kim.
You're welcome. Thanks, Santrice. So she's going to drop those in. We will also make sure those are in the follow-up email that you will get probably this afternoon. And then these are just 3 QR codes, one to our desert map, one to the Paving the Way report, which is looking at the quality dollars. And then our third one is just our sign up for our regular newsletters, where we'll keep you all informed of all the different things that are happening between now and forever. And with that, I think our last slide is just our email addresses. So if you ever have any questions or want to follow up, feel free to reach out to Lynn or myself, Santrice, or any Martha or Christina who are also on the call somewhere. We are all here to help answer questions, or just lend an ear if you need to vent. So, because that's part of the process as well. So with that, thank you, Houston, for being here, and Gulf Coast. We so appreciate you being here. And holler if you need anything, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, everyone.